Let's start with the rugby. A general consensus from everybody really that Saracens were very worthy winners, comfortable winners.
Yeah, dominant force I think is probably the way it's best described. I'm reading Stephen Jones in the Sunday Times. Yesterday in Newcastle we had a fantastic Champions Cup final full of thunder, but also we had sport with brains. Two great sides, but one conspicuously more great. And for me, if you read every word of every report in every paper today, that probably sums it up best, you know. And what's interesting is I don't see anywhere or anyone saying what if the referee had done X, or why it happened, or we was robbed, or there's no sense of that from any journalist, any columnist, definitely not from the Leinster quotes from the team and from the coaching staff. I think it was just one of those where you look and you go, the better side won, and there was no argument there.
I don't think anybody would argue that Leinster deserved to win. You know, like, I do find it interesting, you know, that the same words are used, like, or the same kind of the same tone of words. Like Neil Francis mentioned, the match played with such feral intensity, and Leo Cullen pointing to the sheer size of Saracens. Like, it was an incredibly brutal game, and like it played at a really high level. I do think there were a couple of what-if moments that have been picked out, like. And the more you watch sport, decision-making is key. Like, you saw that with Trent Alexander-Arnold during the week, that making the right decision at the right time. And Luke McGrath not putting the ball dead at the end of first 7. Gary Ringrose, when the overlap was there. I think both of them will beat themselves up over it. Whether it would have made ultimately a difference,
I think hindsight always comes into play in these circumstances. Like, for the last, call it 6 or 7 seasons, those championship minutes are talked about in rugby in particular. The last 5 minutes going into the break, first 5 minutes other side of the break. I guess it's the same in all sports, but for Leinster, that's worked on numerous occasions before. They've felt the need to make a point at that moment in time if the opportunity is there, and Leinster felt the opportunity was there yesterday and didn't deliver, which is as much a testament to the way Saracens handled that period. So they lose, and they lose the game having McGrath having put the ball out, and people go, oh, look, that was a sign that they'd lost their bottle. And I don't subscribe to that. I think you set yourself up, you play with the spirit that you intend to play through the season. You are what you are, and McGrath followed that through, and it didn't work out on this occasion, and it didn't work out, frankly, because there was a team that was better able to deal with it than anybody else has been when Leinster have done that before. Yeah,
Brendan Fanning, the headline in his piece is "Blues bludgeoned as merciless Saracens are in a place amongst greats," and you know, he opens his piece by almost saying you have to go back a long time in history to when Leinster went into a game like this with such a bad feeling, and that was because Saracens were just so scary. Says to have lost by only 10 points to a side in this mood was an achievement in itself, he argues. Says Cian Healy had a terrific game, Jack Conan not far behind, James Lowe very good. Neil Francis makes, I guess, one of the criticisms of Leinster, no answer to murderous efficiency of worthy winners, he says, and he certainly says he has no quibble with the winners yesterday. He makes the point that yesterday some of the tackles that went in, particularly in midfield, would have distracted some of Leinster's passers, but there was too much ball that did not go directly to the intended receiver. For a season or two now, Leinster's passing has lacked the crispness and authority of previous campaigns, which is an interesting point. One of the closer points to criticism, really.
The other thing, like, it's become clear is Saracens are one of the great teams of the professional era, without a doubt. Like, they're up there with Leinster 2009, 2012, and a couple of other teams, and look, when you look at them, you think they've more in them. I do like Luke McGrath had a really good game. Like, he made some of his tackling was exceptional, but you'd wonder, like, in a World Cup year, is that haunting him now? Because you do look at Conor Murray isn't going to finish. Scrum halves don't play full 80 anymore. So there is a vacancy there, whether it's Kieran Marmion or Cooney or Luke McGrath for finishing out big World Cup games. And will something like that go against him with Joe Schmidt? You wouldn't know, because it's something Joe Schmidt would pick out, you know, at a Monday review meeting if he was the coach.
I tell you, I met Bernard Jackman earlier, and there's something that I'm going to bring up with you in a second, but his view was, like, what would worry you on this is Saracens out-muscled Leinster yesterday. England out-muscled Ireland at the start of the Six Nations.
Real parallels.
Wales out-muscled Ireland, arguably not to the same extent as as those other two games that are referenced. But in the power game, Ireland are not at that level. Is a thought process that's worth considering as we head towards the World Cup. I don't know if there's anything in this, but it was the first time that I walked away from a match yesterday, having watched it. And I'm not sure anybody made this point for a variety of reasons. I wasn't able to listen to everything that was being said and done afterwards on the various broadcast platforms. But I wonder, did Leinster suffer from the thing that has been so good for Irish rugby over the last number of years, which is these protracted periods of rest and the ability to build towards a match? And you think Leinster didn't play their full team since the game against Toulouse, what was 3 weeks ago. In those intervening 3 weeks, Saracens have had to play at a particularly significant level in the business end of the Premiership in the UK.
Just to interrupt briefly, they did rest 11 frontliners against Exeter last week, but that seems about right. You know, a week off is different to 3 weeks off.
I guess, yeah, and I guess my sense is when you reference Neil Francis's point about the crisp passing, can you come back? I mean, it's been proven time again that the Irish players have been able to deal with that. But I just wondered yesterday when they were met with something that was as significant as the Saracens challenge. And let's face it, Saracens and Leinster looked a class above everything else all the way through the Champions Cup. And we went to this final and it was too close to call for a lot of people, but I think people deep down felt Saracens might be the better team.
Yeah.
And I wonder, did that rest period... I don't know that it did, I'm just... asked the question. I'm really interested to know, will Leinster look at that in the cold light of day and go, actually, do you know what, some of our guys were too cold coming into this game. Maybe there's nothing in that, but it was just something that I had a sense of yesterday.
Yeah, because I think that is an interesting point, because I was just looking at the player ratings and Jonathan Sexton, because I think it's Stuart Barnes has done a piece comparing him and Farrell, which is quite a really good piece, but Des Berry does the player ratings of the Sunday Indo, gives Sexton 7 out of 10. Rory Keane gives him 7 as well in the Mail, but Stephen Jones, the player rating Sunday Times, gives him 5. So is the truth in between? Is it 6? Probably 6. But
I think that it's also outside half's only as good as what's the ball that they're provided with under certain circumstances.
Absolutely. But just the wider point I was thinking of is, since he's won World Player of the Year, right, he wouldn't have been happy with the Six Nations. He's played hardly at all for Leinster, and he's not going to play much now. You know, they played the final, Pro 14 final. Other than that, how much will he play before the World Cup?
Very little.
Play a little of the warm-up games. He probably won't play for Leinster at all, will he?
He's lacked rhythm this year, there's no doubt. Like yesterday was just his 10th game of the entire season for Leinster. Yeah. Extraordinary statistic. 2018 he had a bit more momentum and a bit more flow. By the way, the Stuart Barnes piece, just as you mentioned, people might wonder, like, he's of the opinion Sexton was really busy, you know, and he talks about the opening exchanges where they got 10-0 up, and he says, you know, Sexton was the linchpin, he was captain composure, he was brilliant, but then things did unravel. He says of Farrell, he said, as for Saracens, such was their dominance that Farrell, one pass apart, was almost superfluous. He is a precious part of a complete team. You know, that's Barnes. If you're wondering how Barnes compared the two out halves, he's kind of saying, well, Farrell had a bit of an armchair ride, is the point. Sexton had one of those tough afternoons where you feel like you're going backwards for so much of it. I agree on the are they undercooked question.
Do you know what? When you come up with the half-baked theory, you go looking for support, right? And it's interesting if you look at a couple of other sports columnists this week and what they've said. There was an interesting piece that Graham Souness brought in the Times last week, where he said that if Anfield will be rocking, the pitch will feel tighter than what Barcelona are used to, and Liverpool will have a physical edge. An early first half goal will test the mettle of Barca in a way the Spanish side probably don't experience on a week in, week out basis. And his point was very simply, Liverpool aren't dead on this, because if they get in, Barca are not used to having to work at that level week in, week out. Liverpool are used to having to scrap everybody.
That's an interesting difference between Liverpool and Man City. Like, Man City, generally, I think their latest winning goal this season was probably Company the other night. Might be it now. But generally, they're home and holes with 25 minutes to go. Whereas Liverpool have so many winners or equalised in the last 10 minutes. And that gives you a kind of bloody-mindedness.
And then Paul Galvin on his championship preview is talking about, having watched football from early division in this spring, I'm convinced football is healthiest when played weekly. Now, I'm reaching and I'm looking for something to back it up.
The only thing is rugby rugby is so physical, professional rugby. It's really hard to play every week.
And I absolutely agree with that. I just wonder when you look at, if you look at the Ireland-England start to the Six Nations, both teams came in the same sort of preparation time. You look at the Leinster Saracens game, they didn't, and I wonder, is there anything in it? You look at Barca-Liverpool, and you know Liverpool, Barca, the question was, were they able to turn it up the gears when they came under the pressure?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a moment where you think actually week in, week out, or at a level more often might be under certain circumstances better than 3 weeks on the sidelines watching and waiting.
Because the World Cup will be.
Sorry, Kieran. I asked Bernard Jackman about this on Thursday at a roadshow, given that he's most recently involved in coaching.
Yeah.
I said, is there no worry that they're undercooked? You list off the players: O'Brien, Sexton, Ringrose, Robbie Henshaw, very injury-interrupted season. James Lowe hasn't played much rugby. Before the Toulouse game at the RDS 3 weeks ago, this was one of the big question marks. So many big names arriving back short in rugby. Why is it not a question for this final? Because, Johnny Sexton has only played 65 minutes against Toulouse. Why is he suddenly battle-hardened now? And Jackman's point was, and he was fairly confident in making it, was that they can now measure what's done in training so well with GPS and various other criteria that they'll get them to the proper state. He was like, it will be okay. They can literally, and it's live information during a session. They can see what's being done, they can up things or they can cool things down, and the numbers don't lie. So that's the level of confidence they have, the rugby fraternity in what they're measuring and training now. But I don't know. There is something of an old school head in you which says, but can you really get the rhythm of a proper game?
I'm just thinking of any walk of life. If you've got a massive day, take it in industry. If you're the CFO of a major company and you've been out of the office for 3 weeks and you're reporting on your annual returns on the Monday that you go back, like, you're on top of your job, but look, it's a theory that I'm looking for a reason why Leinster looked a little bit off the pace yesterday, and Saracens inflicted that on them. There's no question. But the question I have is, if Gary Ringrose had been hit hard and at that pace in a week or two previously, would his game have been more free flowing and he would have been more ready for it? There's got to be a fright when that happens at that pace. Who knows?
Because it's an interesting one, because it brings up the challenge that Klopp and Pochettino have now with the Champions League final, because the Premier League finishes today, the Champions League is 3 weeks' time, and a lot of the players are going to either to the Copa America or the Africa Cup of Nations, and if they go to the end of those tournaments, they won't have holidays till early or to mid-July. So do you say to the players, give them a few days off this week? You say take a week's holiday, come back, we'll have 2 weeks training, 2 weeks will be enough after a long, hard season? Because really, you would think they don't need 3 weeks training going into that at the end of a long season. You can overdo it. Like, it's really hard to calibrate it properly.
Sure, no, absolutely. But my answer to that one in this context would be that critically, in that example, both teams are going into the final under the same circunstances.
Yeah,
They're
but
both
it's whoever. But it could come down to whoever manages that better. Those 3 weeks.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
I think, and it's probably at this stage, there's it's not one size fits all.
No,
they know some players need to keep working. Others don't put on a pick, and they're in good shape if they go off.
Well, and especially because injuries come into it. Like Firmino will have to come back. Harry Kane. So what kind of training do you do with those guys?
You also, to take the point that Bernard made to you, it is so scientific at this point. When somebody like me starts saying something, you kind of go, really? Like, the numbers don't like it, and we have a way of doing it. And
they've done it before.
Yeah, absolutely. But Saracens are a different channel. Like, people talked about it going into Toulouse. Toulouse are a team that have come on, have improved hugely, are unquestionably one of the top 4 in Europe at the moment, but they are at least off Saracens. Nowhere, not the same challenge. It comes back to the same thing for me. Saracens were outstanding yesterday. Leinster were very, very good, but Saracens were outstanding, and they proved themselves to be the best team in Europe.
We'll move off the rugby now. Just one brief point to make, and you cited Paul Gavin. We'll get into the GA in a second, but if you're wondering if there's anything on what's going on at Munster, Hugh Farrelly has a piece on page 92 of the Mail on Sunday. Felix Jones and Jerry Flannery will leave. They've declined to accept contracts that were offered to them. The official line, he says, is Munster were committed to retaining their services. However, he's talking about the nature of the offer they may have received. So, Farrelly talks about, one, the fact that Rob Howley potentially, or certainly someone's going to come in, and Felix Jones is, I don't know, going to be, he says here, relegated to subordinate potentially, or an apprentice role. It would represent a backward step. And even on Flannery's situation. He says Van Graan has made his name as a forwards coach, so who knows how much of a voice Flannery has there. But on the money situation, he says Munster went out of their way to stress that every effort was made to retain Jones and Flannery with, quote, competitive terms. Just how competitive are we talking, he says. And then he writes, Jones and Flannery may have been, the deals on the table for Jones and Flannery may have been less offers they couldn't refuse as ones they couldn't accept. Munster sources suggest the pair's existing contracts were far from lucrative in the first place. One insider describes them as yellow pack deals, with the new offers not much of an improvement. If that is the case, the double rejections on the back of publicly expressed desires for outside experience seem far from logical.
Yeah, and the last line really sums it up, doesn't it? For Munster, it's yet more uncertainty after nearly a decade riddled by it.
Yeah.
Some self-inflicted and some obviously along the way, happening along the way. But
there's no way Felix Jones and Jerry Flannery leave lightly.
I can't imagine that either of them leave lightly. It's a real concern for the province and where they are and where they're going. I mean, I think they did incredibly well with the resources at hand to do what they did this season, as much as they've done and they've achieved. I think they've probably wrung every ounce out of their abilities and what they have at their disposal. And it's a concerning time, and you look at what's happened in the last decade, where Munster had that nucleus of consistency. They knew what they were, where they were, what they were doing, and that has flipped completely to Leinster in the last decade. I think they've got some serious soul searching to do, and whatever plan they put in place has got to have concrete foundations. Otherwise, I would really fear for where they're going to be 5 years from now. And they are vital. They are vital to Irish rugby, and they are vital to European rugby. Their vibrancy, everything about them. It is so hard for people to understand that don't see it, the importance of it in the constituency, in Limerick, in Cork, what it means to it's part of the DNA, and it's easily forgotten, and that potential gap between the public and that team, if that widens, it will be so difficult to claw back.
On that point, Farley writes, if Van Graan brings in more South Africans or any non-Munster centric replacements to go with JP Ferreira, it will increase the debate about the province losing its sense of identity as the playing squad becomes ever more import-driven.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a really important point, because this is
less patience if it goes wrong.
Yeah, because this is something that's been brought up a fair bit now, that I know Felix Jones is from Dublin, but he was seen very much as a Munster man over the last few years, and Jerry Flannery is quintessentially Jerry Flannery is quintessentially Limerick, and it doesn't seem to have that identity that it had. That's sheer monsterness, whatever that's...
whatever that is.
I know, like, Shane McGrath's written in the Mail as well, and kind of downplaying the impact of passion today in the context of Liverpool-Barcelona game, but I think there was something to it with Munster. Like, it wasn't... Their Leinster's Heineken Cup success was more a cerebral thing, but I think it was more an elemental thing with Munster. It was that blood and fury.
Yeah.
And I think it helped them.